I'd like to ask you to join me as we welcome Dr. Bob Moses and award-winning broadcast journalist Pam Cross to the stage.
Dean, thank you. Thank you so much, Dean. We appreciate it. Hello, everyone. Wow, what a nice crowd. Well, we've got our marching orders, huh?
What happened to the picture?
We do want, as the Dean was just saying, we do want to spend a few minutes looking at the past and talking about the rich legacy that Professor Moses and a lot of other people left for us. And then we'd like to go ahead and look a bit at the future. So we'll focus on the past and the algebra project, and then maybe project ahead just a little bit, all right?
Sure.
I know on the back of your programs there's a bio for Bob Moses. I can tell you the Cliff's Note version, his bio, his curricula vitae is way long. He squeezed like 2 or 3 lives into one. Let's start in the period when he was among the leaders of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in Mississippi, in the mid-60s. He was at the helm. He was the creator of Freedom Summer. And Freedom Summer, many of us know, but Freedom Summer, for those who don't, Northern college students were encouraged to go south to help black people register to vote. Some of them put their lives on the line, and I could toss out a few names: Goodman, Cheney, Schwimmer. They went down, they went missing, they became martyrs. So I know I read that you first went to Mississippi in 1959 on a different mission. What was it that pulled you back in '61, in the middle of such a dangerous time? Why go back?
Okay, but let me ask, are we going to see that picture again?
Would you like to see it?
Yeah, because in terms of naming names, there are a lot of people in that picture that we could name.
We might be in the middle of the projection. I don't know. Is that possible? There we go.
Yeah. So, is it all right?
Absolutely.
You guys all right taking a look at this picture? Okay. So there's Aaron Henry down in the bottom corner. Aaron was head of the state NAACP. Down at the very bottom is Ella Baker. And she's laughing, so she's smiling. I'm not sure what's going on. Of course, that's me up there with the mic, right? That's June Johnson there with the little hat on, right? And right next to her is Hartman Turnbull. And Hartman Turnbull's house was firebombed in May of 1963. When we went out to investigate, he was sitting on the porch. He had his shotgun on his lap, and he had exchanged fire with the people who firebombed his house. And when the sheriff came, I took a picture of the sheriff, and then I was arrested, and some of us spent a few days in jail. Behind him is Medgar Evers' brother, Charlie Evers, right, who took over the NAACP when Medgar was assassinated.
He is where? I'm sorry.
Right behind, so Hartman Turnbull, if you're all the way on the right, right, Hartman Turnbull has the sign, Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. So it makes me think we're at the convention, right, where we are actually inaugurating the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party in the middle of Freedom Summer in 1964. And then right behind him is Charlie Evers, right, who came down, right? And then if you go, the young fellow who's, interfacing with me talking, right behind him is John Lewis. You see him right there? Right, that's the young John Lewis sitting right there. And I've forgotten the minister who's down front, but I think, and I'm sure he was the one that first ran for Congress in 1961-62 when we were running, beginning to try to run candidates. And then all the way over on your left is Fannie Lou Hamer. Right there on your left there. It's a great picture. I've never seen it before.
It's a nice one. So what we get out of that is a few names that we know, a lot of names we don't know, unsung heroes. And so to go back to my question, what was the pull to be there at that time? Perhaps not 63, but
So there were two
61, when it
pulls.
was dangerous.
So there were two pulls. One was the sit-in movement itself, right? That's what got me south. I was teaching school at the Horace Mann School in New York, and when the sit-ins broke out, I went down to see Uncle Bill, who was teaching in Hampton. The students were marching, demonstrating in Newport News. And so Wyatt T. Walker came down to give the mass meeting talk and announced that they were going to set up an office for King in Harlem. So I went up, got the information, and actually went to the organizing strategy meeting. Bayard Rustin, who headed up the March on Washington, ran that. And so I volunteered and then asked Bayard if I could go south. And so this is the summer of 60, and he sent me to Ella, right? Ella then was heading up the SCLC office in Atlanta. And then Ella sent me over to Mississippi looking for, scouting for evidence of sit-in activity. And I met Amzie Moore. And it was Amzie Moore who said what we should do. He said, you need to come into Mississippi. The students need to come in and do voter registration work. And so those were the two pulls. It was the sit-in students themselves who woke me up. But then it was Amzie who channeled and said, look, go this way, not that way.
So you're credited with giving us the shift from sit-ins and freedom rides to voter registration with the guidance or the spark, I guess from Amzie, right?
Well, we're credited with actually beginning to figure out how to do that work.
So
Right.
talk about that for a second. You were a little older than some of the volunteers that came down, just a little bit more mature.
So we're not dealing with volunteers now. We're dealing with young people who are high school students, just out of high school, about 30 or so of the young people from Mississippi who emerged from 1961, 1962, and formed the backbone of the movement for the next 3 years, right? So these are young people who've grown up in Mississippi. No one knows about them, but they are the people who actually did the movement, did the voter registration work during those years. One thing I often talk about, Jimmy Travis, right? Jimmy grew up in Jackson, went to Tougaloo College. Jimmy and myself and Randolph Blackwell were driving away from a voter registration meeting in Greenwood, going to Greenville across the Mississippi Delta. This is the beginning of 1963, right? And we were grease-gunned, right? It's like a machine gun.
Say it again?
Grease-gunned, right? So they call it a grease gun, and it acts like a machine gun. So it tattooed the side of the car with bullets and blew away all the windows. And when the three of us were in the front seat, I was in the middle, and Jimmy cried out and slumped, right? And so I grabbed the wheel, the brakes, we went off, right? But what I'm trying to say is that these were young people, right, who did this work prior to Freedom Summer. So it's the Mississippi theater of the Civil Rights Movement. And so it was what I think of as an earned insurgency. So we had to earn our insurgency in three distinct populations. First, the sharecroppers, the people we were actually working with. So we had to earn the right to ask them to risk their lives, right? Some of them were murdered, right? So the way we did that was every time they knocked us down, we got back up, right? And so people finally got the idea that we were serious.
So the sharecroppers?
Right. The second group was the Justice Department lawyers. The 1957 Civil Rights Act had actually provided what I call a legal crawl space. So Mississippi could lock us up, but they couldn't throw the key away. So when I was arrested, John Doe sent Bob Owens, who was in Mississippi. John Doe was, the lineup was Bobby Kennedy, Burke Marshall, John Doe, right, in Kennedy's Justice Department, right? So he sent Bob Owens, who was already in the field. He is a lawyer for the Justice Department, and I was out within 2 days, right? So here you're dealing with the 1957 Voting Rights Act, which said really what they were aiming for were people like Tuskegee professors who qualified to vote under anybody's qualifications. They hadn't anticipated SNCC, right? But so they had in that act that the state can't interfere, either with the person or the person helping them. So as long as we concentrated on voting, then Mississippi would lock us up, but the feds turned the jailhouse.
It was a narrow window, yeah.
Yes.
So you had to convince the sharecroppers, the Justice Department to assist, and
the country, right? So basically, we earned the right to call on the country to come down and take a good look at itself.
how did you work? I mean, practically. I know there were telephones, but for some of
We
the
had a
young
Watts
people
line.
here, there's no internet, no fax, no cell phones. How did you all communicate and develop strategy?
So there, really, what you're looking at is guerrilla warfare, right? And what we had was the Amzie Moores, C.C. Bryants, E.W. Steptoes, right? These were people, NAACP leaders, who survived after the Supreme Court decision in Mississippi was trying to wipe out the black leadership in the state. So Amzie and some of them survived, and they knew how to live a life of struggle in Mississippi, right? And so guerrilla warfare, you have to have a base in the community that you can disappear in, right? And so, yes, so it's the only time in my life, anytime I left, anytime day or night, I could knock on a door, someone was gonna give me a bed to sleep in, food to eat, and they were gonna watch my back, right? So that's what we had. So we had that network of people, and we lived with them. They protected us, they worked with us, they showed us how to live in Mississippi.
They knew how to survive, those Mississippians.
Not just survive, they knew how to struggle, right? They knew how to live a life of struggle. So I learned how to do that there with them, watching them, right?
You are one of those leaders whose name is known, but not so well known.
No, I'm not a media person.
I won't take offense at that. But I'm moving ahead a little bit. You were one of the first African Americans to come out of that civil rights movement and speak out against Vietnam.
Right.
Before Dr. King
Right.
took off.
Right.
Were you afraid? Were you threatened about that?
No. So what happened there was when I turned 18, I was in the middle of my freshman year at Hamilton College. And I had made some decisions about how I wanted to relate to the country. And so I wrote my draft board. I grew up in Harlem. I had a Harlem draft board. We had a draft then, right? So I got this notice, right? I had to fill this out. And so I wrote them, I said, I don't think I want to fight in any of the nation's up-and-coming wars, right? We had just finished the war in Korea, right? And I was really thinking about, well, how am I going to relate to this country?
At 18, you were...
Yeah, I was thinking.
It was on track.
Right? And so I got student deferments while I was in college. And then in graduate school, I still got student deferments. And then Sputnik happened. Remember, the Russians sent that monkey up in space, right? And so after Sputnik, the country said teachers of math and science should also get deferments. So when I left and started teaching, I was teaching math, I still got deferments. As soon as I went down south, they called me up for a hearing and said, you don't qualify for CO status, and I was 1A all the time I was down there. So when SDS started its first student-wide demonstration against the war, this is in the spring of 1965, right? Tom Hayden came down, and he knew about all of this that I'm talking about, and said, would I speak? So I spoke about the war then.
And did you get static from
Well,
the people that give static?
no, I mean, I was outside of the static range by then. I mean, I was, whatever static was going on, I wasn't in position to even know about it, right? I mean,
You weren't worried
I was just
about it.
operating in my own zone, right, from the movement, right? So, I mean, it was no more than the static we got about the movement.
All right, let's jump ahead then. 20 plus years. And I know just from reading that one of your first real jobs was as a math teacher. And
Right.
that's a love, yeah. So at some point, you decided that voter registration perhaps was a key, but education is a pathway, a doorway to life, yes?
Well, let's go back. Go back to the spring of 1963. I'm on the witness stand in the federal district court in Greenville. We've taken hundreds of sharecroppers down to Greenwood. SNCC gets arrested. Burke Marshall removes our cases to the federal court in Greenville. The courtroom is packed with sharecroppers, right? I'm looking out over John Doe's shoulder. He's our lawyer. Federal District Judge Clayton leans over. He has one question. Why are you taking illiterates down to register to vote, right? And so basically we tell him, well, the country can't have its cake and eat it too. It can't have denied a whole people access to literacy through its politics and then turn around and say, you know what, you can't do politics because you're illiterate, right? So now we won that struggle, right? But if you think about the big picture, right, we got Jim Crow out of public accommodations, access to the vote, and the National Democratic Party structure. We haven't talked about that. But we didn't get it out of education, right? So what we picked up is that piece of the struggle, and the Algebra Project carries that on. In other words, we were down there, we were actually trying to develop literacy materials, doing all of that work on voter registration, right? Literacy materials that were culturally based around what sharecroppers experience so that they could learn the words through their culture.
And help them get the vote.
So it's been a long issue, education.
So at some point, though, you determined that algebra, math literacy is a
Yes,
tool.
so that gets us into where we are now, which is transition. This planet is transitioning from the industrial age into this information age. And the tool, right, is the computer for the information age. Well, the industrial age, you know, it mechanized physical work. This new technology it organizes what you think about, right? But underlying it is a quantitative literacy. So in the 20th century, you had to be able to read and write and do the arithmetic of the post office, right? But in the 21st century, the ante has been upped on the quantitative side. You need a little logic, a little set theory, a little algebra, right? And so it's a huge shift, right? And so algebra now is on the table as a literacy requirement for the economic and democratic arrangements of the country, just like reading and writing was in the 20th century. And we're not going to get away from it.
So you started in the 80s and were discouraged, I assume, by what you saw among young African Americans and math, algebra?
Well,
competence?
we had faced that back in the 60s, right? The issue of literacy, right?
Right.
And what I came to think of as sharecropper education, the idea, well, here's a whole people, first you assign them work, right? And then you say, well, the education they get is the education appropriate to the work assigned, right? And so that was the problem. That's been the problem in the country forever, right? That's been the age-old problem. This country has never agreed to educate all its children, and certainly never agreed to educate black kids. It just never agreed to do that.
But you see algebra and math specifically as
Well,
that
algebra
stepping stone into
so
college?
yeah, so here's the thing. We use the vote as an organizing tool to access political arrangements.
Right.
So we're using algebra now as an organizing tool to access educational and economic and political arrangements, only because it's available. It's available during this transition, right? The planet is transitioning,
Yes.
right? And so while it's transitioning, this is open, but you know, believe me, when this transition finishes, it will close. And the kids in the cities now will be the serfs of the industrial age. We're growing them now. They will be the serfs, just like the sharecroppers were the serfs, right, of the 20th century. They will be the serfs of the information age. There won't be any way out.
How discouraging.
Yeah. No, we're sleeping. We're walking around here sleeping. We need to wake up.
Give us a thumbnail sketch of how the algebra project works. You
So
train
basically,
teachers?
what we have worked really hard on is the bottom quartile of the country. If you look at the data, Steve Suits at the Southern Educational Conference or Fund down in Atlanta has put out a report, and everybody needs to look at it. But what you see for the bottom quartile of the economic distribution, right? It's down there 5 and 10% in terms of how it relates to college and school and so forth. It hasn't budged for 40 years. There's been no movement.
They're held
for
there.
40 years. And you're not talking blacks. You're talking all the kids who are operating in the bottom quartile of the economic distribution, and most of those kids are not black, right? So the country just has not, it doesn't have a program. So anyway, what we have done is worked real hard on a little piece of this problem, which is what to teach and how to teach it. So if you grab a kid leaving 8th grade, going into high school, in the year before they enter high school, right, and you get them to make a commitment, right, and what we're telling them, look, you've got to double up on your math for 4 years through high school and do it during the summers as well, right? But we figured out what to teach and how to teach it. So if you do that, you can leave high school ready to do college math for college credit. Now let me just say, when you got me on this bandwagon, the other thing is that we have a myth out here called the achievement gap, right? And so we have all these people trying to close an achievement gap, but closing the gap doesn't get the kids anyplace, because 70 to 80% of the kids who graduated from high school have to remediate math when they get to college. I mean, it's the national dirty secret, right? So what are we talking about here? So what we are saying is what we need is a standard, and we have been working real hard as how you set that standard for the kids at the bottom, right?
Part of that involves training those teachers.
The country has not, I was shocked. I went to a meeting at ETS, the Educational Testing Service. All right, it was called with the Urban League. So you had people from the Urban League all over the country there. They had the person who's running PARC, right, and the person who's running Smarter Balance. These are the two consortium, $50 million each. that the Department of Education has put in the tests for the Common Core, the new wave of tests that are going to come out across the whole country, right? So they're talking about they brought people there to talk about the tests. So who opens this talk is the head of the College Board. What does he say? Teachers are off the table. There's not going to be any policy in this country to provide the teachers needed to teach the students so that they can actually be up to speed on these tests. Right. So the country, you're talking about teachers, the country needs to decide. Look at the Gathering Storm Report, 2005, right? The Gathering Storm Report by the National Academy of Sciences, the first bullet says the country needs 10,000 new STEM teachers, math, every year. It needs to have scholarships to offer these kids for 4 years, and it needs to pay them $10,000 for 5 years afterwards to supplement what they earn as teachers, right? And they need to commit. Bush did a Hail Mary. Obama did the same, right?
Is that one of the most critical issues? Because we're running out of time, and I really want to take just a couple of minutes to talk about the future.
We're running out of time. The country is running out of time.
Is that one of the most critical issues?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about the whole idea of entrepreneurship? You mentioned that just a little bit. That's not professional, but that young people have to take ownership of their own education.
Yes, right, yeah. They have to take ownership, but the country has to decide that they are worthy of an education. Now, the country itself has to decide that the children in the country are worthy of a quality public school education. It has never decided that, and it needs to decide that in every school district across the country. We need a constitutional right to an education in this country. We don't have one. People think they have.
And it's not just resources.
No. Well, people who have the money are the feds. States don't have money, right? The cities don't have money, right? So, you know, it was Derek, I think the president of Harvard said, you think education is expensive? Try ignorance, right? So it's expensive, right? But we're trying ignorance.
So quality education as a civil right.
Yeah. Yeah, as, well, constitutional right. I mean, people think civil rights, they think, oh, that's something white people give to black people, right? Now, so we need a constitutional right to an education, and we need movement for everybody to understand that if we're anything in this country, we are constitutional people, and we need to understand what are our constitutional rights, that being a citizen of the nation trumps being a citizen of Mississippi or Alabama or Massachusetts, right? That's our prime citizenship. It has substance, it means something, and the core things that it means need to be in the Constitution of the United States. And, you know, we have expanded who we the people are, but in the 21st century, we need to extend that to the children. They need to have a constitutional right to an education.
Okay. Professor Bob Moses, I think we're out of time, yes? Yeah, we are. I really enjoyed our conversation. There was so much more. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the young people's wing of the Algebra Project.
Yes, right.
Another time. But thank
Okay.
you so much for sharing with all of us, and thank you for listening.